everybody, welcome to Comic Line. I'm Sal.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Tiffany.
Today's topic is about nostalgia, specifically whether it is good, bad, or maybe someplace in between for the comic book industry. I'm going to hinge it specifically on the DC Rebirth event and how it kind of harkens back to nostalgia and how the whole damn thing hinges on readers' expectations and tapping into the 18 to 45-year-old demographic. It is something that we all feel for one thing or another, comic book fans especially. As a veteran comic book fan, I can tell you that I have nostalgia for things I didn't even experience. Because growing up, these comics would refer to events that happened decades before I got there. And as a reader, it's funny, I hear about how everyone talks, new readers feel like they're left out. You know, they always feel like there's no good place to get their footing. And they feel like they're left out of the industry or they're left out of the world. And so they need a good jumping on point. For me, I always saw that as a challenge. I was like, I want to be part of that universe. I want to be part of this world, this greater tapestry they keep referring to. And then when I would find it, because it was at a time when all comics kind of were similarly written, it didn't feel dated. You know, it wasn't like, okay, go out and read a book from 30 years ago, and then it's like, oh, I am very aware that I'm reading a book from 30 years ago.
Right.
G. Willikers.
It was in the transition from maybe some of the campier, less serious...
To more modern.
To more modern style
expectations and style of writing, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So, for me, it was always a challenge, but I definitely loved the nostalgia, though I must say, I feel like when I was reading books, more things were being created than referred to. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like that's difficult to quantify.
Right.
But not having read comics at that time, I take your word for it that could be the case.
Yeah, that's how it felt anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be that it was just like, it was rehashing old stuff. But even if it was rehashing, I feel like it was clothed in originality, and it wasn't celebrating its nostalgia. It wasn't like, hey, remember these books from 30 years ago?
As compared to now.
As compared to now. Because now... The comic book industry feels like every time that they try to be original, they react and go, oh, well, they didn't want that. So here's what you remember. That's how it feels.
Okay, but when does nostalgia go from being nostalgia to just being lazy?
Right. Or pandering.
Or both. Yeah. Well, and, I mean, to me, the potential drawback for nostalgia... or relying too heavily on it is what you already mentioned. It makes it more impenetrable for the reader. So or for the new reader. So I can imagine it's kind of like they're doing it for the bottom line. Like most of the people buying comics are people who already read comics. So it's like, well, we can make more money if we pander to
if
we pander people to give the people what they want,
right? Or what they think
to
they
be more
want.
generous with it. Yeah. But is that costing you in the long term?
That's the question. Is nostalgia good or bad?
How many stories can you really continue to tell before you do have to rehash things, before you have to restart a universe, before you have to tell origin stories again, before you have to try and bring new people on board?
It's a good devil's advocate, although I would counter that by saying, like, how many times can you tell Spider-Man's origin before everyone is like, we get it?
Well, especially cinematic-wise.
Right, and...
So from that perspective, it's not lazy, it's just there's only...
so many
a finite number of ways to tell a story.
Right, but I think that there's a distinct difference between nostalgia and a reboot.
Yeah. Well, like look at the New 52. You know, full reboot, kinda, unless you were Green Lantern or Batman. But also highest selling books, pretty much in DC's history.
Right.
And while DC Rebirth is selling well, capitalizing on nostalgia, A, it's still set in the New 52, and B, it isn't selling quite as well as the New 52.
So you're saying that DC Rebirth, you feel, more depends on redoing stuff from the past, whereas New 52, even though it was borrowing some things from the past, it was more different from the storylines that had come before.
Yeah, I think the New 52 was more different than the stories that had come before, although, I gotta argue, like... You know, it was more of an opportunity, I think, for them to be like, let's do some of these things over again. And I gotta tell you, fan reaction, I was most deafening when it was referring to or capitalizing on something that came before.
Right.
You know, when they were like, oh, they're referring to this.
In a positive or in a negative?
In a positive.
Okay.
Right.
No, I don't think anyone was like, they're doing the thing again? That thing I liked? Why would they do that?
Well,
Right.
then
Unless it was like Batman's origin, which I complained heavily about.
Right. Then maybe the issue isn't if nostalgia is good. Maybe if the pursuit of nostalgia is good. Because when nostalgia is done correctly, I think it tends to always be positive. I think it's always something that people enjoy. You know, like the thing about nostalgia is you're nostalgic for it. You enjoy it.
Yes.
It's something that like
Well, you remember it fondly.
exactly.
Though, if I were to go back and watch like Thundercats, for
Right.
example, it's horrible.
No, exactly. But maybe the issue is when a company pursues nostalgia incorrectly and it doesn't capture that moment and instead just feels lazy. And that's where we run into trouble is the attempt at it.
Yeah.
Well, is DC Rebirth really just capitalizing on the image of nostalgia, or are they trying to recapture the essence of it? Would we say that they're doing a good job of... Go ahead. So is DC Rebirth really just taking nostalgia and saying, hey, we're going to slap the characters in some of their old costumes and make them feel like their old selves, but we're still going to tell new stories? Or is it really they're just rehashing some of the stuff?
Oh, no,
that's
it's your
happened?
first point, which is, I think, a well-executed version of that. But I gotta tell you, like DC Rebirth, right? It starts, and it's hinged on, what's the big thing everyone's talking about with DC Rebirth? It's the Watchmen Connection. And they did new Watchmen stories, completely original new Watchmen stories, which, while they put all their effort into them, were not very well received overall, by and large. There were a couple of gems, but overall, most people were like rejected them and said it wasn't as good as the source material. Now we're gonna do more Watchmen, and we're gonna do something new with it, but we're still gonna capitalize on this book from 1986.
Right, but I don't know if I would count that as nostalgia.
I think
Because
that
in a sense that is almost something new. You know, that connecting bridge is something they've never done before.
yeah, but the visuals of like, oh, Dr. Manhattan, there he is, I saw him.
Like, I remember when
Right.
he was in the...
When he was in the Watchmen
was in
book.
a
Right,
better book.
but like, is it the anticipation of like seeing Dr. Manhattan and I guess the nostalgia of that, or is it really the anticipation of seeing him interact with beloved characters such as Superman and Batman?
I mean, that's definitely what it is. I think that everyone just wants to know, since everyone knows or thinks they know Dr. Manhattan, they like just can't wait to see him interact
Right.
with the universe that
Now,
you know.
for me, I think that DC's attempt at nostalgia, I think, is best exemplified in Superman from Rebirth.
Yes.
Yes.
Like, that for me is the, like, okay, we heard you.
Right.
And though people do enjoy New 52 Superman, there is a contingent out there who truly miss him.
prefer it.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's another contingent who was like, that's not my Superman. I want the guy I remember.
Right.
And I think that is where we could definitely like pinpoint the nostalgia factor. And I'm just going to point to a couple of other characters we could probably discuss as well. The Flash.
Yep.
Green Lantern. Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
And in terms of her origins.
Right.
Batman has gone...
Batman is like, well, he does it all.
It's just
Everything
Batman.
that you liked happened, and everything that you...
Exactly.
And we'll just keep doing new
Well, he
stuff.
just keeps getting more stories, so we can tell whatever we want.
But I think in terms of Flash, in
Yeah.
particular, there was an outcry.
Oh, yeah, DC Rebirth, like, that first issue when we bring back Wally West was a big response to. But that was more like old readers and their perceived majority.
Yes, but I still think that's nostalgia, though, 100%. Like, that's DC's perception of nostalgia. Like, okay, we hear that people miss this character. Even though we're attempting to build new characters, we're attempting to build new stories, it's clear you want this. We're not just going to throw the other one out, but, like, we're going to bring you back to it. Remember those stories? Mm-hmm. You remember, like, when we had Wally West and he was running around and he was doing all kinds of things?
Yeah.
Yay!
I like that because I remember it.
And that's not saying it's necessarily incorrect, especially with how they handled it. In which they're like, no, it's just there's like lots of flashes right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
So-
they didn't just like meh, get out of here.
So the question then is that people like that, people want that, but not all people. So is that, as a new reader, is that like alienating because you're getting this moment in a book and it's a huge reveal and you're like, what?
Who is that?
Yeah. Like,
Well,
I just started
moment
reading a
doesn't
year
make any
ago.
sense to me.
Isn't there already a Wally West?
Right.
Like,
What's
yeah.
funny though is in a weird way that like this nostalgia factor, right, is almost like a trial by fire for these new readers.
Yeah.
You know, like those who
Yeah.
have never experienced a crisis before, those who
Yeah.
don't understand like the intense changes that can come within like a shared universe such as
Yeah.
this. this is like hey, listen, you better get used to this.
Yeah, because your favorite thing that was brand new to you, it's going to go away. And be replaced by something from 30 years ago.
Right. Also, your favorite thing happens to be something that causes change all the time, if you're talking about Flash.
Yeah, that's true.
Also, critical plot points are not going to make any sense to you because you're not steeped in 70 years of comic lore.
Well, and unfortunately, when it's not incorporated into the story and they say, oh, well, just check out this old issue, or remember when this happened back, blah, 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 that is incredibly alienating. I think
I always thought that as
a signpost, it's better than if something just happens.
I love
they don't
that.
even acknowledge that it's a reference.
But should be explained in the story. If it's good storytelling, then it should be explained in what's going on. And sometimes it's not.
I think that's a fine line that you walk there, because then those who know that are just like, oh my god, you're just wasting panel space trying to explain to this contingent of new readers that I don't even know necessarily exists. At least with the box, nowadays, you go online, you can look up on Wikipedia or whatever, like a quick summary of what happened and be like, okay,
all right.
Cool. If I want to go grab that, maybe I will.
Right.
But at least I have a little context now.
A little context, but at the same time, if you want to read a book, if you have your issue in front of you, and in order to understand it, you have to go someplace else, that's detracting from the story.
I guess. I mean, like, my phone's in my hand at all times, and I often even read comics digitally.
Yeah.
So, like, I can easily switch from one to the other if I really need to know something.
Not everyone can.
I would say right now, at this point in history, it's the easiest it's ever been to go back and look up stuff.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, for me, when I was growing up, and it was just comic book stores... Yeah. And they did this a lot more back then than they do now, where they would say, like, see issue, like, 268.
Right.
For what he's talking about. And then I'd be like, okay... And then I go to the comic book store and I look for 268, and if it was a critical issue, it was usually like marked higher price, so it was a little harder to get. But then it was, for me, it was like, but I want to know what happens.
So it was like a treasure hunt.
Yes.
It was like an adventure.
It was. And that sounds kind of silly and lame, but like also, and it is alienating in that regard, because like if I'm a kid, I don't have $8 to spend on a single back issue, that sucks.
Yeah.
But now... I can get it for like $2 online. I mean, now it's like, I wish that there were more like annotations in the books that like referred to things that you could go back and get, because
it's easier than ever.
Like you said, it is easier than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine like when I was the age that you were when you started reading comics.
Yeah.
To me, I would have.
You would have been on his camp.
Yes,
I
would
be like, screw you, 268. No,
this is ridiculous. I'm not gonna put this much effort into trying to figure this out. I mean, I was a huge Star Wars fan.
I was gonna say, like,
and that stuff drove me crazy when I was reading the Star Wars novels, and they're making references to other novels I hadn't read and to comic books that I was not aware of.
Yeah,
and it was like maddening, and it was almost like I almost gave up.
Yeah,
because it was so frustrating because there were so many like plot points that hinged on it. So. Comics, it would seem like would be like 10 times.
Oh, it's that exact thing.
Yeah. But now I Google everything, so now I don't know. If I was a kid growing up now, maybe I would be more willing to go through that.
Well, I think it'd be second nature at that point. I don't know who that is. Boom, there it is. Okay, never mind.
I think there's also another element to nostalgia that we might want to discuss before we kind of wrap this whole thing up, but not just in like direct character, like we change this character's origin, we change this character's identity, like whatever. I think also DC has been experimenting, and I'm just going to point to Superman in particular. In the feel of stories. Like, we've seen Superman in Action Comics go through these arcs where it's just like, this is very reminiscent of like early Superman, like maybe a little bit cheesy, a little bit Americana.
The last two stories, the last two issues of Action Comics, for example, were very steeped in like old, but not like in a like, remember this? It was more like...
It was a feeling.
It was like it was written back then. It was like they found a script from 20 years ago, and which was a little weird.
Right.
Now, to me, that's a very blatant and obvious example of an appeal to nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's the entire style.
Oh, and the art style was also reflective of the time. And I gotta tell you, like, it was kind of hard to read.
Yeah,
like it was, especially in the context of that series, to take such a hard left, backwards. It was kind of weird.
You're talking about Action, right?
Action.
Yeah.
So to be reading like the current Superman and then go back to Action Comics and be like,
Well,
this is
just be reading
visually
action. Just be
damaging.
reading action comics, and then for 2 issues, it just feels like a book from like 20 years ago.
Yeah,
and I'm
it
like,
really did.
and because I remember books from 20 years ago, I was like, yeah, all right, but like, I was like, yeah, all right, but like, I can't even imagine if I was like 12 and I just got in. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, Superman.
Yeah.
I think I've got it all figured out. And it's like, why did this feel so old and weird?
Yeah, like
I'd be confused.
At least I was aware,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like I was like, whoa, like this
Yeah.
came out of nowhere. But you know, being where I am, I guess like at least I understood the appeal of it. I understand like what they were attempting to
Right.
capture
Right.
with
Well,
this.
good for whoever wants to read this.
Yeah.
Very much so. And then I adjusted my monocle and
Yes.
you know
Whoa.
swirled my brandy. But I've seen them do it in other like stories as well, and in very positive ways. Where at the end of it, you're like, "Wow, this felt like a really classic insert character story."
Yeah.
Like, there's not something I can necessarily point to within the story that made me feel that way. It was just something about the overall feel.
Yeah.
And like I've noticed it more and more in recent DC.
Yeah, I definitely know that exact feeling, and when I encounter that, I really enjoy it, but I do wonder, I have this complaint about comics constantly, would it be better if there was some sort of indication, especially when it's particularly blatant, where there's a couple issues that are just
Right.
totally different than the rest of the series, if there's something there to explain that this is going to be a little different, so
Right.
that you're not just like, what are they doing? You know,
Right.
like if you don't have that background where
Yeah.
you understand exactly what they're doing immediately,
Yeah.
you know, to me that would be helpful. I often complain that they don't have, you know, DC doesn't put little explanations at the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the
Just
Marvel
talking
page has that one
Yeah.
page that explains
just
the
a
context.
little bit, just a little context, so
Yeah.
you can jump on board.
Right.
So
To
something
touch-
like this is a very special issue or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
some
no,
of it
Or
wasn't.
nostalgia edition.
I guess no, but for me, like, all right, in Superman, there was a couple of stories that like it just felt like a really like down home, like,
Yes.
like style arc, right? And for me, again, that captures that nostalgia, that feeling of like remember like old Superman, like remember, like this is part of his character, right? But I like to think that for the new person coming into this, the person who maybe read the New 52 one and is now here, or hasn't read that at all and is just, all right, what's this all about?
Yeah.
Like I kind of have an idea of Superman. I like to think that if it was effective back when, like in the day,
Back when it was relevant.
then it's probably effective now to them as well if done properly. Like if I'm feeling like that nostalgia and that part of it where I'm just like, wow, this just feels like a classic story, that like they will have that feeling of, wow, this is really cool. Like there's like something about it that like they might attach to, and like again, it's nostalgia done well.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. I like to think that classic stories that I'm nostalgic for are classics for a reason. I mean, I always cite like what's a timeless book versus like an older book, and that obviously that's relative and it's in the eye of the beholder. Like some people like don't think year one is as relevant as I do, you know?
Right.
And so but for me, I'm like, well, that, you know, that's contextual, but. And you could argue that like it's nostalgia that makes me feel like it might be timeless, or it might. I'm like, no, Spawn's timeless. You know, like no.
I mean,
I
kind
feel
of.
no. I feel nostalgic for it. Like
Right.
there's nostalgia has both good and bad connotations to it, and I think that it's actually kind of like fascinating because like nostalgia makes you, you know, feel good about something that happened in the past. And maybe you shouldn't go back and revisit it and just enjoy the feeling. You know, like I like my Thundercats analogy.
So
or
the danger of going back through and seeing it through your eyes now.
yeah, I mean, and maybe putting it under the scrutiny of modern sensibilities is a problem. I was thinking about the tie-in with Watchmen. Remember the cologne that Vite Industries created in Watchmen is nostalgia,
Yes.
and how Alan Moore within the pages of Watchmen warns against like the alluring fragrance of nostalgia and how it's really a coverall
Sure.
for like your scent.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like relevant today, which is kind of ironic. That, like a book that's 30 years old is
Yeah.
still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Well, the message
And
in it,
warns
yes.
about nostalgia in and of itself, and that DC is not only using those tropes, but using that very text
Yeah.
to gain its, to, you know,
The text often considered sacred,
Right.
and untouchable.
oh, and then touches all over it.
Yeah.
Not only touches it, but like rips it open and grabs the characters and shoves them into a universe that they have no business being in. So for some people, I am excited about it,
Well,
despite the fact that I think it might be a sacred text.
Here's a question that I want to bring up real quick. The idea of nostalgia is something that is old, that is revisited.
Right.
What if it's something that has been continued? Just like a lot of the comics that we're reading, they have been written continuously throughout the years.
Yeah, like Marvel has one continuity. One
Exactly.
timeline.
So does that feel less nostalgic because you have been getting story after story consistently? You've been growing with it versus a story that is stopped, that is old, that is then restarted.
I don't think so because of the fact that you typically have multiple writers, and so people will become nostalgic for a run.
Yes, I find that I'm nostalgic for full stories in DC than I am for Marvel, but there are runs that I am definitely nostalgic for.
Well, certainly the writers are nostalgic because they want to go back to when Spider-Man was a
little boy.
Yeah, not married, unshackled.
Well, and that's what's interesting is that like when they get into when people who were readers or were creatives and then become editors or people in positions of power, and then they have influence over the books themselves. Their nostalgia will influence the run and fundamentally alter the forward momentum that run might have, or maybe give it the shot in the arm it needs. I think that some nostalgia can be used for good, but I wouldn't rely on it.
You don't want it to be a crutch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is that your final say on that?
Yeah, I say that nostalgia should be, you know, I think that, you know, we leave the past where it is, but it's always nice to take a look once in a while. You know, like I wouldn't use it as my driving force for creative endeavors.
All right, that's fair.
I would agree with that. Certainly the Alan Moore
I
perspective. Of,
don't know if I'm as cynical as Alan Moore is, where he's like,
cautious.
it's gross and you're covered in it.
Yeah, but there's certainly the reason to be wary. I think to the extent that it stifles the creation of new ideas and new directions, it's bad. So over reliance, as with many things, too much of a good thing.
Yeah, obviously moderation is obviously more.
Personally, I feel like nostalgia has its place. You should definitely look back on things with fond memories, but the idea of a story and a character growing and moving forward is always better than being held in the past. So I think nostalgia is nice where it is, but in terms of moving forward, you know, let the future take its course and let the characters and the stories have their own impact. Create something new and see what comes from it. Even if it's not great, that's a learning experience, and you can build off of that better than just relying on the past.
Well, I think that capturing the sensation or the emotion that you once had once again within a book, like whether not actually just rehashing something old, but like that feeling, that like emotion. Yeah, I think that's a positive. I think that's something that, again, well done, could actually bring new readers into the fold in a sense, like capturing that feeling. I also think that nostalgia is one of those things that everyone will change their opinion on as they grow older.
Yeah.
And so, like, the opinions I have now, if you asked me, like, even 5 years ago, it would be different. And if you asked me 5 years from now, it would be different once again. Because of the fact that, like, it's funny, the nostalgia is ever present, but always changing.
I think when it's most effective is when you're not taking ideas wholesale or characters or images, but you're actually taking an emotional connection to something from the past. It can be more subtle, and it lets you like be more creative.
That's what Rebirth actually kind of feels like.
Yeah.
I like the point that Ben made also, where you said that like even if it's bad, like it's still a learning experience. Like don't be afraid to tell backstories.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, even with that Action Comics run, where it was
kind of weird,
it did evoke that emotional.
Yes, I felt like I was reading a book from the '90s as opposed to being forced to do.
But if someone new came into that, they would have that same experience.
They'd be like, "What?"
But it would be like that same feeling that you had even back then, except for the fact that in the '90s you were steeped in the idea that this is cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the idea, is that emotions don't change. Ideas can, but emotions pretty much are always a constant.
Yeah, but
like what you feel about something, it can change.
Certainly, we're going to feel differently about something that's nostalgic or representing an earlier time than a kid who has no context for what that is.
Yeah.
You know, they know it feels different, but they don't necessarily know what it's referencing because it's evoking a cultural moment that they have no context for,
right? But
never encountered.
But in that specific instance, they would probably be having a very similar reaction to the person who remembers that moment, where being like, "Oh, why are you doing that? Oh, why are you doing that? I don't even, you know what I mean?"
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
it's a very similar reaction, but for different reasons. And again, that's in a way it's weirdly done right.
Yeah.
Where like two people are having a similar
Yeah.
reaction to something, even without the context necessarily.
That I think that's the mark of a timeless work. You know, like Dark Knight Returns, when it came out, it like blew the doors off of the character because everyone was so used to like Adam West Batman and like Batman kind of being a like low selling commodity and people being like, holy shit. And when you're like 13 in the year 2011, you're reading Dark Knight Returns, you don't have the context for like how crappy Batman was and how like worthless he was perceived.
How groundbreaking it was.
Right, you also are like, I've never seen Batman like this. Even now, like they still like as much of a grizzled old man as Batman is, they still can't do it.
Well, some of the history is given in that book. Like, the surroundings really do add so much to who Batman is in that story that you don't need to know a whole lot of what had happened beforehand. You don't need to know about Adam West.
Well, yeah, the story works
on its own. Yeah. And
but the impact, the cultural impact, you're not aware of reading.
No, but I think that the impact
sort of
on
meta aspect of it.
But I think the impact on the reader is seismically similar, even if it isn't like culturally the same.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. That's when. Well, that's when you have a timeless work, but that's a different conversation.
Absolutely.
But let us know what you guys think in the comments down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we'll see you guys next time with an all-new episode of Comic Line. I'm Sal.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Tiffany.
Thanks for listening.